The prisoner was calm. Collected even. Raker was confident and he showed it. Though the collar and chains shortened his usually long stride and he had to remain hunched over to avoid hitting his head on doorways, he remained as upright as possible, meeting the eyes of the guards escorting him whenever he could. He knew his compound eyes unnerved the humans, along with his 8-foot frame, allowed to him by his noble upbringing and the resulting genetic modification rights. He had heard the guards compare him to a cross between an insect and some mythical creature called a werewolf. He liked that they compared his species to a predator of legend, and even when captured, he would not let them forget his superiority. They didn't even have the bravery to remove the immaculate battle uniform that marked someone of his station with its brilliant red and gold colors, though they had changed all the other prisoners into bright green jumpsuits. The details surrounding his present, albeit temporary, capture still made rage boil in his glands. Though it was not his fault, the battle had gone so poorly. Who in their right mind would have expected this race of weaklings to come up with a method of troop transport involving drop pods from orbit? After all, the last 20 human worlds had fallen with little to no fight. His underlings had failed him, that was all. He would escape soon enough, or his brothers would come for him. These filthy creatures would be exterminated and he would take command of his army once more, as was his right, being the High General of the Chlorian forces. Raker noticed his escort changing direction as they walked down the bare metal hallways of the prison. Though he had been in captivity for only a few cycles, he had learned to anticipate when the direction of travel shifted. If he didn't and tried to go a different way, they would activate the collar and render him immobile until he complied. Though it winded him to do so, Raker detested being dragged around by his enemy much more than simply following them. He noticed that they were going to a part of the ship he was unfamiliar with. He pricked up his senses, hoping for a chance of escape in this new territory. As the trek carried on, he observed the metal hallways give way to whitewashed walls and even wider floors, lit by almost blinding lights. He felt his eyes darken in order to protect themselves. The air seemed to drop in temperature as well, and his fur stood on end to combat the sudden cold. Raker gagged at the strong antiseptic smell that began to clog his particle sensory frills, but kept his retching quiet, not wanting his wardens to see him falter. After several more minutes of walking and a few more turns, the escort halted in front of a seemingly random door, which immediately opened to reveal the human ambassador, with whom he had spoken upon his arrival here. Raker heard the collar whine as it prepared to perform its secondary task as a translation device. The human ambassador spoke. "General Raker, a pleasure to see you again. I must apologize for our last meeting. It wasn't very productive in nature. As I told you before, I am trying my best to have you cooperate in our peace talks. I am offering you one final chance to accept, one final chance to end all this bloodshed and prevent any more unneeded deaths among your people. I must insist for the greater good of your species and yourself that you reconsider your current position. It is by incredible luck and generosity that you are being extended this courtesy at all." Raker squinted his eyes in his species' version of a smile and began to bellow in a shrieking tone, filling the air with his laughter. "You dare make demands of me, human filth?" In a threatening tone no less. "And what, pray tell, will you do if I refuse? Turn off the atmospheric conditioning in my cell? Deprive me of sleep? Oh yes, I've heard of your methods and it fits you perfectly. You're weak, all of you with your rules of war. No, I think I will be abstaining from your feeble offer and await my inevitable rescue." Raker sneered at the ambassador. These fools didn't know who they were messing with. The ambassador sighed, and his shoulders slumped. He shook his head. Raker heard him say in a relaxed tone, "Very well, General." He then turned his attention to his fellow humans, motioning behind himself. Gentlemen, we have done our best, but I'm afraid the diplomacy has failed. Raker was surprised to see the ambassador grin, his teeth flashing in the light. Take him to the dock. Oh, and by the way, nice touch keeping him in uniform. God only knows how much it will stir him up. Can't wait to see the recordings. With that, the ambassador stepped out of the way and allowed the party to pass into the room behind him. Raker was unnerved slightly by this exchange, but thought nothing of it. He knew of human interrogation techniques. He could take anything they threw at him. Raker observed the large open room he was led into. He quickly noticed the abundance of medical equipment. They must be in the humans' medical wing, which would explain the smell. Why in the world would they bring him here? His attention shifted to the middle of the room as he picked up on movement. His guards were taking him to a chair. It wasn't this that shocked him though, it was the fact that the chair seemed to be made especially for a Chlorian, and even more disturbingly, there was a Chlorian life support system installed next to it. Raker reasoned it was there, in case he was accidentally injured. These humans were surely the most hindered species when it came to warfare. It was only when Raker got closer that he noticed the almost emaciated human standing next to the chair, adjusting the life support system. The human turned as they approached, his face obscured by a surgical mask and his body clad in fitted scrubs and a tailored doctor's coat, which only served to accentuate his rail-thin body. He looked more like a skeleton than a living being. That wasn't the thing that sent a momentary shiver of unease through Raker. It was its eyes. They were electric blue, steady and unwavering as they stared into Raker's own. Raker shook it off. This was after all just another human. Filth beneath his boot. For the first time, he heard one of the guards speak. "Hey Doc, how are you holding up?" The human, now identified as the previously mentioned Doc, never looked away from Raker, his eyes still locked on the general's. "As well as to be expected, Kelly, thank you for asking. How are you and John doing?" Still his gaze didn't waver. "Oh, we are doing fine, Doc. John says to say thanks for working on our Jessica. He says she wouldn't have survived if anyone besides you had worked on her." The human called Doc nodded his head. "He is right." The guard shook her head rapidly. "Well Doc, consider this a thank you. I'm bringing you a real special one. Doc meet." The Doc held up his hand to silence her. "I know who he is. Sit him down." The guard nodded her head again rapidly. Why did she seem so nervous around this man if he was a healer? One of her own as well. "Okay Doc, you got it." Raker felt them prod him forward. He growled in rage and snapped at his guards. "I will sit at my leisure, scum," he screamed. Raker knew they wouldn't use the collar unless absolutely necessary. It was just another way he could maintain control. He straightened up and brushed his uniform smooth, taking a seat slowly into the chair. It was then he noticed the Doc had not moved during his outburst. He was still staring. Author's name and the link to original text is in the description.